Yep. And I'm not sure if we need to go through all these again, but we are in Cascadia Conservation District, and we're a non-regulatory organization here in Chelan County, and work with landowners and communities on soil, water, forest, fish, wildlife conservation. And these are some of our projects. You have my email address, there's our website, and our phone number down there at the bottom. So, again, thank you all for coming back and joining us for this panel discussion. Should be lots of fun. I'm Kirk Beckendorf. I'm the educator with the district. And we have Betsy Dashback, Al Murphy, Julie Sanderson, excuse me, for our evening. So, so kind of our plan for the evening is I have a couple of opening questions to have them discuss. And then a number of people have previously submitted some questions on the online form I'd sent out. So I have those for our panelists. And then if you have questions during the evening, put them into the chat and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So, and then, you know, our last words of wisdom that they want to give us there at the end. So, I've sent out all the PDFs for the different presentations. We will get all those posted onto our website, and I'll send out an email about that. All the YouTube video, the recordings are now on YouTube on our channel, and you should have all received the email about where, you know, how to access those as well. So, but we'll get everything all into one place at, here in the next few weeks. So, and I'll let you know about that. So, jumping right in here. So Betsy, Al, Julie, so we spent the last month talking about native plants, but kind of step back a little bit and tell us, what do you mean, each of you individually, what do you mean by native plant? So I'm going to stop sharing here and let you guys jump in there.
Who wants to go first? I guess I will. So when I talk about native plants, I didn't look up the exact definition that I had referred to, but pretty much they are plants that have adapted over thousands of years to local conditions, and also have co-evolved with insects and birds without human interference. And when I think of them, I think in terms of a region. Let's like with birds, they have migratory patterns, and there's western birds and there's eastern birds. So for my purposes, I like to think of kind of a starting here and then moving out into the regional areas that encompass similar conditions or support similar plants and insect and bird and other populations. So that's how I view them.
You should unmute before I start talking. I was going to add to Betsy's definition, even, you know, sometimes the same species, when the seeds are collected and used for restoration in a different area within a larger region, can be less well adapted to the place they're planted than something that would be collected very locally. So even, you know, small distances within a region can make a difference for some plants of the same species. So you can look at native being broad, like a region, or even the West. In some cases, you know, you see people selling seed mixes and materials that are native, and they're really native to maybe west of the Rockies, all the way down to a local, you know, sunny slope where you've collected some blue bunch wheatgrass and it grows better in your area than it would further north or further south. So it can be a small region, it can be a large region. And I think, you know, when we think about it for our yards and for our plantings, sometimes, you know, it's the closest thing you can get as far as availability of the plants to the region that you're planting it. So that's another way to think about it. And I just wanted to add that all of our weeds are actually native plants somewhere else. So, they're here, and they may have been here for hundreds of years, perhaps. Most of them not more than hundreds. And they're adapted very well because where they came from, they may have adapted to similar climates, but in another country. And so, you know, people back where Russian knapweed comes from, I doubt that they're putting it in their plantings, but it is a native plant there. And some of our weeds are actually considered threatened and endangered in their own countries of origin. But here, for some reason, they've expanded and become very weedy. So all of these concepts are different depending on where you are and how big you consider your region of nativeness.
Hey, I'll throw in. Are you done, Julie?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off. If
No, it's okay.
I'm jumping in there quick. I was looking at this in definitions and terms can sometimes get us in trouble, but other times they can get us out of trouble. And a native in my thinking, the way I look at it is indigenous, as both of you guys were talking about, is that it's in a biome, it's in a specific biome. For example, in what I look at as different biomes on the east side, at least the three, we got the mixed conifer, the dry forest, the ponderosa pine type, and then out into the sage steppe. Each one of those is different. And what's a native in one of those may or may not be a native in the other one. So it depends how tight you want to do things. The other thing that I think is important, as Julie was talking about, is that there are some grasses, for example, bunch grasses, that have been, one of my least favorite grasses is crested wheatgrass. And I would not consider it a native. It's a hybrid. But a lot of people really like that particular grass. And then there's some other ones. Whitmar wheatgrass is another cultivar of blue bunch wheatgrass. And then there's several other that don't get quite as tall and don't take quite as much water. So people have been playing with the natives and doing some genetic manipulation with those. So, those could be considered native, or maybe not. It depends on your definition. So it depends. I think when you try to talk about something, you need to define the terms that you're talking about. And it's okay if we have different definitions of terms. But as long as we're talking back and forth, that we have to have the same kind. Somebody had brought up the idea about Oregon grape. There's a bunch of Oregon grape. There's all kinds of different species of Oregon grape. And some of it is native to here, and some of it is not native. It's an exotic. An exotic is something that didn't develop over the thousands of years, as Betsy talked about, in this particular biome. So I think it all depends. You got to look at the soil, you got to look at the climate. And as Julie was talking about, I don't know if you mentioned the term, but seed zone is a very important thing. Elevation, latitude, longitude, those come into play. And if you're planting trees, particularly, I know some examples where they planted native trees, lodgepole pine, at about 8,000 feet in Wyoming, and the seed source was from about 5,000 feet. Well, the trees grew up, and they all got about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, and then one year they had a heavy snow. Every tree in the plantation cracked and broke off. And so those were not adapted. They were phenotypically, they looked pretty and they looked like they were, but they were not genotypically. That means that they didn't have the right genes to grow in that specific environment. So make sure when you're talking native that you guys, that everybody has the same definition when they talk about a term. That's enough probably about that.
Betsy or Julie, you want to add anything?
No, I think that they filled in quite nicely. Yeah.
Alrighty. So following that up, if my screen will move forward here. So this is all of our workshop is all about native planting and using it in our landscape. So as homeowners here in North Central Washington, I see we're in a very we're not on the west side, we're here in our climate. So why and how can we consider native plants as part of our landscape around our homes? Betsy, do you want to jump in on that? We'll
Yeah,
just go in that same order just for.
Yeah. So there's 3 or 4 reasons. First one is adaptation to local precipitation. So water is a finite resource, and with climate change, one never knows what's going to happen. So that, for me, that's a big one. A secondary reason would be to establish a local landscape style, a local field that embraces the natural ecosystems around us. I keep thinking of, like, if you go to Florida, you're in Florida. You don't see Midwestern plants down there, right? Or Southern California, there's a Southern California style that embraces those limitations of the climate and the soil. So why not here? Other obvious reasons are reducing the need for pesticides and herbicides. And I'll probably leave it at that and let Julie and Al take it over.
Well, I'm going to address that why from a non-landscaper perspective, because I'm not a landscaper. But often when I see that people move here, maybe from someplace else, or maybe are just moving onto a bigger property, sometimes they have more than they can deal with in sort of managed, landscaped, watered kind of Midwest style flower beds. 1 or 2 of those maybe is kind of nice to have, but people take on a bit more than they can handle. And the more of that they can leave in a natural state, the easier their life is going to be. And also, if they have an area where they do have weed problems, so often I see people get rid of the weeds, but now they have bare ground and they're going to have a weed replacement occurring where another weed's going to come in that may or may not be easy to get rid of. And so some of those places that are, a little more difficult to manage maybe could so very well be put into some native vegetation with grasses and shrubs and even some forbs that would require less maintenance in the long run and be more successful than constantly battling weeds in difficult spots. And those difficult areas, they're the kind of areas our native plants have adapted to. And so for that reason, everybody can't maintain every inch of their property the way they might want it to look with irrigation and whatnot. But if you do have these areas that are problematic and they tend to go to weeds, this might be a longer term solution to replace those weeds with something that's a little more self-maintaining. And as Betsy mentioned too, just retains that landscape feel of the Northwest. So I think that's a really good reason to put natives in your landscape.
I love that answer, Julie. I love that. I think it's so
thank
important.
You.
So important.
Very good. I guess, I would add a couple more things to that is using natives. They're adapted. And probably the key word in ecology is interrelationship. Ecology is the study of interrelationship between the biotic, the living stuff, and the non-living stuff. So it's the interrelations that between the plants, the animals, the soils, the water, all those things. It's the interrelationship. And when you have something that has got a good interrelationship, there was a fellow named Barry Commoner. I don't know if anybody ever heard that name. He was an ecologist at American University. He had 4 principles of ecology that he based them on. That nature knows best. So when you use a native, the probability of that living and working in harmony is pretty good. And then the other thing he said, there's no free lunches. And if you think about it, if you try to shortcut something in nature, you don't know when the payback is going to be coming or when the bills will become due. if you will. But I promise you, they will be at some time. It may not be today, but it is sometime coming. The third item is everything must go somewhere, okay? So when you start trying to get a non-native plant going, you have to add energy, nutrients, or various things. You know, with energy, it's a flow through the system. So it takes additional energy many, many times to have some non-native to survive in a system. It takes energy, whether that's personal energy or additional sunlight, or if it's some type of nutrient, which can be cycling around in a system, it's going to take additional amounts of that. And then the fourth item that he talked about is nature knows best, okay? Or no, I already said that. No free lunch, nature knows best. Everything goes somewhere. Oh, I screwed up. Now I forgot. I thought I wrote them all down, but that's okay. You get the point, is that nice, simple things. In fact, there's some great ecological classes that have been put together on this. So the idea of maintaining a minimum amount of energy and a minimum amount of nutrients so that the interrelationship there is a nice, good balance so that it doesn't take a tremendous amount of excess energy on our parts, if you will.
Betsy, Julie, anything come back? Okay. So we have some questions that were previously submitted, but I think we'll kind of take a little tangent here. So there's several questions that came in into the chat, and I think we'll just go ahead and answer those right now. So Deborah asked about mulch, and what's your best choice for mulch when you're greater than, I'm assuming that it's 10 feet from the house, with wood chips or bark or ponderosa pine, for vegetable gardens or native shrub beds.
I'd like to jump on that. Is something I wanted to talk about, and I'm not sure if I did talk about it much at all. But from a fire-wise standpoint and an ecological standpoint, it is possible. I've been involved with some research. I worked for the United States Forest Service research for quite a while at the beginning of my career. So I got tied up in a number of research. One of them, what they did is they took all the slash from a timber sale and put it back over the site where it was generated. You know, they took the logs off and then chipped all the slash. This was on a lodgepole pine at high elevation, and it was an absolute disaster. It tied up all the nutrients in the soil, and it was kind of chilling, if you will, literally, because the ground was staying way, way, way too cool for a lengthy time into the growing season. But I guess I have a preference, and I have a biased opinion. How's that? I'll start off with that. Is from both a fire-wise standpoint and a nutrient cycling standpoint, I really, really like red cinders. Red cinders are a volcanic rock. The technical name for them is scoria. A lot of people call them red lava rock. It's really not lava, because once it comes, when it's in the ground, it's magma. And what happens, the magma hits a pocket of water and it spatters out, and it just throws it a short distance. Probably you all seen these cinder cones. Bend, Oregon has just literally hundreds of them all over the place, and they have a lot of red rock down there. Scoria is the red rock. It's non-combustible. You don't have to replace it every year. It slowly puts out micronutrients into the soil. It's very rich in iron and other trace minerals. It keeps the soil moist year-round. Scoria is almost 50% air. In fact, some scoria will actually float. It's almost like pumice. The other thing, it keeps moisture in and temperature down during the summer. And in this particular portion of the world, those are two areas that I think are pretty important: moisture and the temperatures, keeping the temperatures down. South aspects at about a 40-degree slope will have soil temperatures midday somewhere pushing close to 200 degrees, about an inch off the ground. think about the amount of heat that radiates and then comes back out just a little bit. It's not that hot right at the surface, but about an inch off the ground, it's extremely hot. And think about that. How much vegetation do you see on a south slope, you know, at our 45-degree latitude, or 47-degree latitude, I think we are. Somebody ought to be able to help me out there. I think we're at 47, close to 45, halfway between the equator and the North Pole. So that's my opinion. That's a really nice, it doesn't get blown away. And in case you didn't know, North Central Washington has an opportunity to experience tremendous winds on occasion off the Cascades and blows away a lot of material. Now, this is particularly true from a firewise standpoint up close to a structure. However, if you like to have some diversity, you can, I think that is extremely important to have diversity. So having wood chips out in different places, doing different things where you, particularly when you're going to get down on your knees and do stuff, you may want to have wood chips in there. They are less flammable, by the way. Wood chips are less flammable than the bark is. But even if they do catch on fire, the probability of the flame getting much past a foot high is pretty rare. Okay, maybe that's enough. Maybe I should shut up and let you guys.
So yeah, so for me, I don't like lava rock at all from an aesthetic point of view. So I would, and I like organic outside of that zone because the bark mulches are going to gradually decay and add organic matter to the soil. So I would vote for the big pine bark nuggets, or when I was in the Midwest, we used the shredded hardwood bark mulch, which was really nice, and it didn't blow away. But I would definitely stay away from the what I would call forest fines, or the real fine mulches that do turn to dust and do blow away in the wind. So that's my vote.
Okay, if I could offer, Betsy, the scoria is, again, it's not lava, it's a scoria.
I know. Yeah.
Is it produces as much, and it's already broken down.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into a big debate on bacteria and turning nitrates to nitrites and what have you. But sometimes you get too much organic material, large organic material. You do tie up the nitrates. Is nitrogen and nitrates. Nitrogen is never an issue. It's nitrates that are picked up by plants, and you know that's what's available to plants, right? I'm done.
Okay. All right. So
well, of course, there's always a weed issue with everything. So I would just like to chip in a little bit here and ask, you know, to think about why you're using mulch. If it is like Betsy mentioned, for aesthetic purposes, I mean, it makes a nice uniform appearance under shrubs, but a lot of people think that mulch is going to solve their weed problems. And it certainly goes a long way for smothering weeds. So whatever you use, lava rock, non-lava rock, chips or bark, you have to spread it thick, or you have to spread it on top of a landscape fabric. Beware of the lure of landscape fabric, because it eventually will grow weeds on top of the fabric and under your mulch. And then there's the problem of not getting, you know, the landscape fabric overlapped well enough, or around the edges, the weeds can creep in there. So really think twice about why you're using mulch, if it's really for looks, if it's to smother weeds, because, you know, depending on your goal there, you might have to do a different kind of mulching if you're really trying to use it mainly to get rid of weeds. It'll have to be very thick to smother weeds. And the other thing to consider is when, not if, the weeds start to grow through your mulch. It can be very difficult to pull weeds when they're growing up through rocks and even bark. It's not real pleasant. And so if you're not wanting to use herbicides and you're going to have to hand pull, you know, just be aware what kind of material you use, because you'll have to be pulling weeds out of it eventually. And also, if you do have to pull up your landscape cloth and it has 2 inches of river rock, well, it's going to be tough I've done it. And, you know, especially when it's been there for a while, you can actually develop a layer of soil, you know, on top of the fabric under the river rock, and that's very heavy to move. So chips, or like the red cinders that Al mentioned, being lightweight, that's a big advantage, because sooner or later you're probably going to have to replace the landscape cloth or pull it up because so many weeds are growing on it. And having a lighter weight material is actually much easier to work with in the long run.
Betsy and Julie, there's a new research. In fact, Kirk, I will send you the paper from WSU, and they are really downplaying the value of any kind of geotextile fabric cloth underneath most mulch, because as Julie just mentioned, that within probably within 2 years, you're already going to have enough dust have blown in to create a suitable germination point for weeds. And once they start going through, it becomes very challenging to get those out. So there's some new research, just a couple of years old, that's talking about it, just questions whether or not we should even use geotextile fabrics underneath mulches. And I'll send you.
So I would answer that by saying, in a landscape context, if you're going to put a stone or a rock mulch, I would say put the best available fabric down that's going to last, you know, for decades. The goal would be to make it last for decades. This is notwithstanding the weed issue, because you want that rock to stay there. I was on a landscape renovation once where the crew literally had to dig like 18 inches down because the fabric was long gone, and gravel, gravel, whatever gravel, will eventually migrate through the soil. So for a gravel or a rock mulch, that's, for me, that's the primary reason to use the landscape fabric, is to keep that layer of rock separate from the soil.
Great. And see, that's the advantage of scoria. It floats. It doesn't sink into the soil.
And Deborah, you thought you asked an easy question. All right.
Wait,
So,
I hope this comes out that we all have different opinions of doing different things.
I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
All right. So,
Oh yeah, I have my answers.
Yeah. So these.
I'm ready.
So yeah. So and so these were specifically addressed to Betsy, but the rest of you feel free to jump in after Betsy. So there's 2 sets of questions here. So you know, I'm not going to read them to everybody. You can read them. So Betsy.
So I had 2, when I was talking about annuals, I had 2 in mind. The yellow bee plant, which is Cleome lutea, and Rocky Mountain bee plant, which is Cleome cerulata, and one's yellow and one's pink. And they would be, again, regionally native, but they're annuals. And the trick is, I actually got some seeds myself from little packets from Western Native Seed in Coaldale, Colorado. But the problem with the native annuals is you have to remember to either sow them outside in the fall or start them in pots 30 to 60 days, you know, sometime in the winter, so they get the cold, moist stratification. And when I was checking into this a little further, another great native annual would be narrowleaf Phacelia, which is the Phacelia linearis. So that's one question. And then the poor clay soil in an area of more sandy soil. So for the clay soil, the old manure would definitely help with drainage. And what else should I do to make sure these plants thrive? I would say probably the most important in a clay soil is not to overwater, especially for natives. So you really want to make sure that the soil dries out in between. So if you have irrigation, go minimalist. You can always add a little water. So that's what I can say on that. So, is that clear? So
Yep.
Okay. So
Right.
yeah, I did my homework, like I said. So for native plants or pollinator gardens within HOA regulations, or someone seeking a more traditional look, So my experience with HOAs, luckily, is fairly limited, but what I remember of them is that they generally call for things like 2 shade trees or a flowering tree and a certain number of shrubs, like in the front yard. So if you're using native plants, there's no reason that you can't, swap out natives for non-natives and meet those criteria. As far as I know, it might be a real fussy, hypercritical HOA, in which case I would suggest moving, but that's just me. So, so yeah, down here in the city, we don't have those. And if you're looking for a more traditional look, I would say there's just just follow the normal landscape design guidelines, which would be layer plants, so masses of perennials and groups of shrubs, and all that, and don't do the kind of hit or miss or mix it all up kind of jumbled look. You still want, a mass of this perennial or a mass of that, and accent grasses or accent shrubs. Treat it like a regular landscape. You're just using a different plant palette to achieve the same look. That's pretty much how I approach design with natives. And the other question about ground cover under deciduous trees. Now it says locusts. I'm not sure if they're talking black locusts or honey locusts. So I'm not sure about that, but my recommendations would be, number one, make sure whatever ground cover you're going to use is drought tolerant. And number two, make sure it can take at least part shade. So I have a few suggestions on that. Kinnikinick, creeping Oregon grape, pine grass, and spreading dogbane are all kind of ground covery plants that would probably be okay. The caveat is there when they're saying, if I do use grasses, can I expect them to thrive without irrigation? And not just the grasses, but any of those. If you're planting under a tree, you're in competition. Those little plants are in competition with shade trees, and they're going to lose the battle. Somebody's going to lose. So supplemental watering as frequently as it's going to be needed is probably going to be a necessity if you're gonna plant under a shade tree. That's my take on it.
Okay, Al or Julie, you want to have anything to add on any of those questions?
Well, I again, like I said, not really chiming in on a landscape point of view, but as far as the question about the HOA, I've just kind of seen some things like this happen as I go around looking at weeds. And that is, whatever you do, just avoid the meadow in the front yard look, especially if you buy seed mixes that say they are a native mix for your area. I've seen a lot of things that are sold as, Northwest mix, and it'll have all kinds of weird stuff, that could maybe be stretched to be considered a Western mix, but things that, may not be native and sometimes actually invasive. So just to avoid those meadow mixes, particularly in the front yard, if you're, part of an HOA type of situation, because I'm sure those would not be welcomed.
I would add, and in fact, I pose a question. I believe Locust has an allelopathic substance in its leaves. Julie or Betsy, are you guys familiar with that?
So we're talking about black locust then, Robinia?
No, that's what some of the locusts do.
So
Go ahead.
I don't know that. I mean, I know that about walnuts and black walnuts and other things, but I don't know that about locusts because it's not something I would use in a landscape.
Well, yeah, if you're dealt the card of a locust, then maybe right. You want to, deal with it. But I agree. Locust is probably not a great tree to have around. They are fairly short-lived. I mean, relatively speaking, in the tree world, and they also get very brittle and break pretty easy. I'm not 100% positive, but I think black locust does put out a substance that makes it challenging for some other plants to grow underneath. That's not a for fact, okay? That's I should look that up before I even comment on that, but that may be the case. The other
I
one,
think you're right, Al. I think that is true. And even if it's a honey locust, which is a different genus altogether,
Right.
yes,
I have honey locusts at my house and a steep slope underneath them. And there are some grasses that'll grow there, like smooth brome, but it's very oddly bunchy, and there's bare ground patches, and especially where there's been accumulations of the pods, because we had a female tree that produced fruit. And I think there is something going on under that tree, because it does look like it suppresses, you know, the growth of things we try to get going underneath there. And again, I'm not positive about that, but that'd be something to look up, you know, for any kind of tree you have on your property, because we all think about the walnuts, but there are other trees that do that, and even some other plants. I know if you use, you know, sunflower seeds, especially the black ones in your bird feeders, those hulls have allelopathic properties as well, and it can kill your ground covers and things that you might have growing under a bird feeder after a winter of using the sunflower seeds.
yeah. Even ponderosa pine has an allelopathic substance in the needles that prevents other trees from growing in. If you ever notice underneath a big pine, you'll see a circle around that tree where there's almost nothing growing, unless it's burnt frequently.
All right. So I'll have a question here for you. And in the chat, the person who sent this in also said they were interested in questions about sagebrush and the benefits of sagebrush in a thinly forested area, if they wanted to, should clear that out or not clear it out, or.
Well, let me offer some thoughts. I'm not sure what kind of brush we're talking about here, but if it is sagebrush, under a natural regime usually had about 20 to 30% canopy closure. That means if you look down on it from an airplane view, that you would see about 70 to 80% of the ground in grasses and forbs, and only 20 to 30% was under a shrub canopy. What happens when that shrub canopy gets heavy, and I am answering this question, but I'm going to explain a little bit about it. When the shrub canopy gets very thick and very high, what it does, it prevents the heat, called heat flux from, hot air generally rises, but a dense canopy forces the heat to stay underneath the sage canopy for an extended period of time, which in turn bakes the soil. The damage from a fire is in that type of environment is from heat being added to the soil. Usually if you have a 20 to 30% canopy closure, all the heat can go up and it doesn't really cause much damage to the soil at all. If it does, it's only in selected little areas. So you have a fire that vents very rapidly, and so it doesn't cause a problem. Anytime you have dense canopy, whether it be shrub or tree, heat gets forced down and doesn't get vented out very rapidly. That is what causes problems to the soil, which in turn wipes out the native vegetation, which in turn allows for exotic weeds to come in following a fire. So if that makes sense. So what you can do is you can go in and thin out and reduce the canopy, the top, the canopy density of shrubs, and try to get that so if there is a fire, it will allow the heat to rise up. So decaying debris on this side of the mountain is not a big issue. Decay is extremely, extremely slow. The way nutrients and energy flow through a system on the east side is through frequent fire under a natural regime. Okay, so decomposition is extremely slow on the east side. On the west side, the opposite is true. When you get down to a moist, more humid environment, decomposition is very rapid, and a lot of the nutrients are in that organic layer right above the A horizon in the soil. So that's a very important part, but over here, it's not that important. So cleaning up the forest, if you will, that is a key thing to keep in mind. So thinning out in shrubs, if you can keep shrubs about 2 times their height away from each other. So if a shrub is 2 feet high, keep them 4 feet apart. Canopies of trees, keep the canopies of trees about 10 feet apart. The branches that of the trees, the canopy, you know, the live branches, keep those about 10 feet apart. I believe, does that answer that question, you think?
I think so.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right. Next.
Oregon grape. Okay, that's a good thing. If somebody had asked a question about the different Oregon grapes, to the best of my knowledge, the only Oregon grape we have on this side of the mountain is Rupins. Rupins is the species that we have, and it rarely gets much more than maybe 3 feet tall, but generally they're about a foot tall, something in that order. It does not burn well at all. It has lots of characteristics that don't allow for it to burn. However, the material underneath it can burn if it's pine needles and what have you. And that's generally where you're going to find that stuff. So I would not be at all concerned about the density of Oregon grape on this side. I'm trying to, now I forgot the genus. Do you guys, Betsy or Julie, I forgot the genus of.
I know 2 different.
Well, the genus is.
It's Berberis, I think,
No.
unless
Yeah,
it's been changed.
yeah, now it is. Yeah,
Oh, no,
that's
yeah,
right.
that's right. They
Yeah.
It
changed.
was
That's why
Mahonia, and now
it
it's
was
Berberis.
Mahonia rupens.
Yeah.
Now it's Berberis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what
and then
about the big shiny leaf one? We have Berberis, is it Berberis aquifolius? There's a tall
that's
one
more
with
of
the
a, that's
shiny.
more of a much more mesic, high moisture content area. I don't know. I'm not even sure if we have it on this side of the crest.
I see it in a lot of places.
Okay, if we do, then it would probably only be in the mixed conifer forest. It would not be in the dry. It definitely wouldn't be in the. It'd be in the transition between the sage steppe and the ponderosa pine.
Oh, yeah.
Is
Not in sagebrush.
no, it wouldn't be in the sagebrush.
Yeah.
The only place I think we would have aquifolium would be up in the higher elevations in the more mesic areas. That at least I haven't seen it. Most of my experience is up in the Chelan Basin. I've spent literally thousands of hours up there, and I haven't seen it up there. We may have it down here that I'm unaware of. I should say there's more I don't know than what I do know. Okay, so I'll make that a preface. But I know a fair amount. But I don't know if we have it over here. I've seen it frequently on the west side. Okay, so I wouldn't be too concerned about Oregon grape, but I would be concerned about some of the finer woody fuels underneath it, the twigs and what have you. And it wouldn't hurt, depending on how close it is to the house, you might want to clean it up. If it's out away from the house, I would not worry about it at all if it's more than 30 feet from the house. Oregon grape actually is a plant that sucks up energy out of a fire. It's called endothermic. It absorbs energy rather than giving off. Exothermic means if a piece of firewood you put in the fire, that's exothermic. It puts off heat. But when you have something green like that, it's endothermic. It takes energy away from a fire. Okay, it burns, but it doesn't burn with much ferocity whatsoever. How tall should allow shrubs to grow underneath ponderosa pine? Is a good rule of thumb is to keep the plants 3 times from the height of the plant. You want to go 3 times the height of the plant to the first branch of a ponderosa pine. So for example, if you have a 1 foot shrub underneath the ponderosa pine, you'd want that bottom branch to be at least 3 feet. If you have a 3-foot plant underneath the ponderosa pine, you'd want that bottom branch to be a minimum of 9 feet. That's kind of a good rule of thumb. What you're after there is 2 things. The flame length, which is the amount of energy, the number of BTUs given off from a fire, and also scorch height. So you don't want to be scorching a lot of stuff, that desiccating the needles. So that's why that 3 times is a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. So a 3-foot plant, 9 feet of height to the first branch. Does that make sense?
Yep, very much. Betsy, Julie, you want to jump on any of these?
Nope.
No?
Sounds good.
All righty, okay. Let's move on. So Julie has several questions for you as well.
Okay, so I guess I can't exactly answer for the public lands and parks. It depends on who's managing them. I mean, a lot of our public lands are federal, but there are also state lands. The federal lands are pretty much operated separately. They don't really have to follow the state weed laws. They have their own noxious weed lists at the federal level. And I think we do work pretty well with the local people at the Forest Service as far as if we notify them of a problem, they try to do within, their means what they can about it. And I do get a lot of comments from the public about the public lands. And what I like to tell people is that a lot of times the public land managers are struggling with funds for weed control. And there's a lot of money that goes into the federal lands and state lands, but it doesn't all go to weed control. And in fact, that's usually one of the smaller parts of their budgets. And it helps if you talk to someone who's in charge of things, and even to write to legislators about weed problems on public land, because I think the more they hear from people who are frustrated about weed problems, the more likely they are to channel some funds. And, I've been told at the Forest Service, at the upper levels, the people who are in charge of the weed program, please send us information, send us pictures. I need to do an annual report to support my budget. And the more information we have about what's going on at the local level, where the frustrations are and where the problems are, the better we can do at making a case where the funds need to go. And so, I would say channel your frustration into trying to contact people at those agencies where you see a problem. They don't necessarily have to listen to me as, the county weed coordinator, because they have their own fish to fry, so to speak, and their own weed lists and what they worry about. And I think our local land managers do try to make an effort, and some of them communicate with me, ask me, what can I do about this or that? So I know there's some work going on. Unfortunately, knapweed is such the poster child for weeds in general, and it's so widespread. And frankly, it's kind of one of the lower priority weeds because it already is so widespread that sometimes what you see the most of is really not the thing that people are worried about or working on, just because it is already so common. As far as the other question, ways to get rid of mullein, dock, and thistles. Mullein is, I guess it's mainly a biennial to short-lived perennial, and dock is definitely a perennial. Both of them have in common a large taproot. And as far as the thistles go, if we're talking about biennial thistles, they also are large taprooted plants. And so if you want to do manual control and the amount of these weeds that you have is reasonably a small enough amount that you can do it by hand, these kinds of plants in general with the big tap roots, you can do what I call deep shovel cutting. And this is different than digging them out. You don't necessarily want to make a big hole, because if you dig out a dock or you dig out mullein, you're going to make a big hole and cause more disturbance and stir up the seed bank there. But if you go in at a good angle, cut the taproot, you know, several inches below the soil level, you can often just pull the remains of the plant out, and some of the root will remain. But if you cut well enough below the crown, most of those won't regenerate if you get a good deep cut on it. If the thistle is a biennial like bull thistle, that method will work as well. If you have perennial thistles like Canada thistle in particular, that is a different story because it's spreading underground with rhizomes and almost impossible to actually dig or control manually. I mean, you can always mow it and mow it and mow it and try to harass it to death, but you know, the thistle might win. You'll get tired of the repeated cutting, especially if it's not in an area that it's easy to mow. In the case of a perennial thistle, I would really recommend herbicides. I know some people just get their back up as soon as I say herbicide. That's all she ever says is use herbicide. But some of these noxious weeds are the most difficult to control in any other way. And that's why we do end up having to resort to using herbicides. And herbicides work in some situations. It's the ounce of prevention that's gonna, you know, prevent a world of weeds that you can't control, because once they get so widespread, I mean, certainly hitting your perennial thistles with some herbicide when they take up one corner of your pasture is easier than trying to battle them when they take up an acre of your pasture. And so for those perennials, I think really there's not a good way to control them besides herbicide. But if you want to use manual methods for biennial thistles and docks and sorrels, the best thing is to do that kind of deep shovel cut and pulling them out. I find that you can pull mullein by hand in the spring when the soil is moist. Dock is pretty much impossible unless it's a pretty young plant to pull out. The root is really strong and deep, and so they're best to be, you know, kind of chop the root and pull the tops out.
Okay.
I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, I can add a little bit on the having been frustrated for about 13 years as the district ranger at Chelan on federal land. I can speak a little bit to what Julie's talking about. Funding for weed control comes as a unique line item. And so frequently, as Julie mentioned, we rarely got enough money to do anything on weed control. So the federal government has a specific, what they used to call charge as work. You can only work for what you get funded to do by Congress. Okay, if Congress doesn't fund a specific program, they don't want you doing work in that area. However, one of the things that we used to do a lot of, particularly at trailheads and other parking areas, I'd take the fire crews out and we'd pull by hand whatever the weeds were at the time. And that's kind of challenging, as Julie mentioned. It's hard to catch up, but you can kind of keep them in check. The other thing that I spent a lot of my time with was the Caprina up lake. It was discovered while I was the district ranger there. And we had the inmate crews out there for the entire time that I was there every year. We'd have a big inmate crew out there hand pulling up in the Lake Chelan Sawtooth Wilderness area. And we'd camp them out there at Lucerne and then boat them across and pull and pull and pull and pull. So weed management on federal land is a challenging thing that is never, ever funded at the appropriate level. And I think if you do know of a patch of weeds or someplace where it's heavy, is if you share that information with the local ranger district, they would appreciate that.
I was in Yellowstone National Park a few years ago and middle of Lamar Valley, and there was one person out there in the middle pulling noxious weeds, and he was a volunteer. So here's an ID question for you, Julie.
Yeah, I looked at this this evening, and I just can't quite tell what that is from a photo. And I was wondering what weed killer was tried. Something like that just to me doesn't look like it would be that hard to kill. with a little squirt of Roundup or something like that. I mean, if you're using maybe vinegar or something like that, I could see that it might not work. But I really I just can't say. It almost looks like it is rhizomatous, but without a flower or a little more to it there, I just am not able. I feel really bad about that because I like to be able to identify everything that I find. But if it looks more familiar to somebody else, who might be able to chime in. But like we talked about before with the mulch and all that, sometimes it's hard to pull these things once they get rooted through the landscape fabric. But this one looks like it's more coming up in the cracks. And I would say I'd try again with something like Roundup. And if that doesn't work, I don't know, I guess manual removal is going to be best because it sounds like it's not really widespread if it's just coming up, you know, in your rocks and your mulch. Try to prevent it from photosynthesizing at all. Whenever you see it, just yank it out.
And, you know, if the person who submitted this, I don't have your name right handy here, but if you want to stick in the chat there, let us know what you tried to use or what you used. Maybe that she could narrow it down a little bit. I think, let's see.
Sumac.
Yeah, there's some questions that weren't really addressed to anybody particular. So
I'll talk about Sumac if you want.
Sure.
So the deal with Sumac, the native smooth Sumac, is it's a great plant with awesome fall color. But what you have to remember is that it will form a colony. So if you're going to plant Sumac, make sure it has plenty of room, or that you have it has a pavement of some sort to stop it spreading where it shouldn't spread. And it is super, super drought tolerant, but it will still need water to get established in probably, I would guess maybe once a week during the establishment period, maybe in August or the heat of July and August. You might want to increase that to maybe twice a week and then wean it back. But yeah, it's a great plant. I like it.
Does anybody know about the stand and native oaks Mel mentioned?
No.
No. And I'm going to put email addresses up here, and you could.
Is that white oak? Was that white oak? I missed that. I'm sorry. I was reading.
Native oak. So I don't.
Gary oak.
Oh,
it was the Gary oak we were talking about, I assume.
No,
right?
there is a white oak that is native to the Okanagan. I happened to look that up. I've never seen it, but I saw that. I was reading a thing about the particularly Oregon white oak is native to the Okanagan. I did not know that. I just read that this week.
Oh, okay. All right. Couple of others. And I know, Julie, you're going to have to leave at 8, so we're going to have to finish these up pretty quickly, at least for you. So
I'll start with these if you want, Kirk.
Okay.
So good plant to stabilize the soil on a steep, sunny bank, and also needs to be fire safe. So the fire safe, because normally a good choice would be the bunch grasses, but fire safe, I would say try snow buckwheat, yarrow, blanket flower, and blue flax, because they're all plants that establish pretty quickly and can self-seed to kind of fill in the gaps and get a good get good coverage. So those are probably ones that I would use. And the question for Mel about the woods rose, I would probably pretend it was a regular rose as far as the pruning, and probably cut it back, not to the ground, but like 12 to 15 inches, and give it a chance to rejuvenate. And if there are any, dead wood, if there's any old canes, just cut those out completely. And then under tall ponderosas, roses, I think these can take a fair amount of shade, but roses tend to do better with sunlight. So I hope that answers the question. That's what I would do if they were mine. So
All right.
I would cut them back, but not to the ground unless it's a dead stem or dead wood completely.
All right.
I agree with Betsy as far as that rose is concerned. You can trim those back quite a bit and they will come back nice. It's the root system on a rose, on the woods rose, that you really want to manage. Okay, and just keep the root system good and healthy. Pruning them back is a great idea. Take out the big canes like she was talking about. One of the other things that I would mention on the grasses, or excuse me, on the hillside, is Sandberg's bluegrass is a wonderful grass. It will burn. However, it will only, the plant only gets about 6 to 8 inches tall. And if you mix it with the yarrow and some other, even lupin is out through there, it's a great mix. Sand drop seed might be another one that you put in there to go along with that. And so there's a good mix that you can do with that.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going to just sign off, Kirk. If there are any questions specifically for me, people can email and I'll be happy to answer, and all the other questions that we had during my presentation that we couldn't get to, I think are posted somewhere for people to look at. So
Right.
I'm just going to say good night and thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Night,
Good
Julie.
job.
Bye.
Good job, Julie.
All right. So have the email addresses of all our presenters here. So if you have additional questions, they've already given you these in their presentations as well. So if you have questions for them, they have said they'd be more than happy to answer questions. So, and of course you can email me as well. And this was also recorded, and I'll get that up on the YouTube page next few days. So let me stop
I
sharing.
have one more thing, Kurt.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. Well, I'll leave this up so people can write it. Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Is I had mentioned, and in fact, I read, and I shouldn't have repeated it, potentilla being a evergreen shrub. Depending on where you're at is what hardiness zone you're in is whether or not potentilla will stay evergreen. Most of our areas, it will not stay evergreen in potentilla. The shrubby cinquefoil is another name for the potentilla shrub. And so depending on where you're at, that may or may not stay green year round. Okay.
All right. So now I was not able to see the chat while I was sharing, so let me jump back in over here. I think I did see earlier there were some other questions came in.
I see one is a second choice after scoria. The red color doesn't work for me. Well, you know, that's fine because you can get scoria is the reason it's red is it's rusting, it's oxidizing. But you can also frequently get that, I won't say frequently, but by checking around, you can get it in a gray color where it's not rusted, okay, where it just pops out of the ground. Hey, I got a tricky question for you. What side of the earth has the most magma in it? The inside, because once it comes out, it's lava.
Good point. Recommendations on dealing with cow parsnip and mixed conifer setting? That might be more of a Julie question, but
That's a Julie question. No idea.
What?
Is that the extremely toxic plant, cow parsnip, that if you touch it, you might
No.
or am I thinking of another one?
You're thinking of camas. What?
No, there is a wild parsnip, I think, or that is, it's you can't touch it without reacting. So, but I don't know.
I've
right.
not heard that.
Well, any other questions?
Is Rick Edwards looked up the locust, and I don't know if you guys saw it in the chat, that they are allelopathic, both of them. So I was right.
Thanks,
Yay.
Rick. All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. And Betsy and Al, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. And
You're welcome.
For what it's worth.
Al, they call that plant in Alaska pushki.
Pushki, okay.
Yes, I have known several people of extended family that have been burned by the sap.
Okay.
They got chemical burns from it.
Wow.
wow.
There is a I can't remember, white camas. Don't get it mixed up with the blue camas, which is an important Native American food, but there is a white camas that is poisonous. And I don't remember the Latin name for it right now.
You're talking about death camas.
Yeah, death camas. And I forgot the Latin name for it, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks
Somebody-
again, and shoot us any emails if you have any other questions.